Great, Rachel. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for attending this Clean Water Lecture Series. Um, and good afternoon to you all. I'm Ethan Swift, and I'm here with my colleague, Ben Copans. We're pleased to be here to provide you with this overview of the continuous evolution of our basin planning work towards a data-driven, watershed-based approach to develop water quality management plans with a geographically explicit focus to identify actions that protect, maintain, enhance, and restore surface waters. We will provide an overview of Vermont's integrated approach to watershed planning that is multidisciplinary, collaborative, scientifically driven, and where we seek to leverage resources to support the ongoing implementation of high priority projects by sector and focused on natural resource restoration and protection priorities in particular. The process will continue to evolve, and now with the implementation of Act 76 that further enhances our collaborative work, we will collectively move forward. So just an overview here of our presentation. I'll be starting off and just providing a little retrospective on Vermont's previous basin planning efforts with a segue into sort of what our current approach is to tactical basin planning. I'll provide a little overview of some of the regulatory underpinnings of basin planning, and then also just explain a little bit how we integrate surface water monitoring and assessment data into our tactical basin plans. I'll then hand it over to my colleague Ben to present on the tactical basin planning process and tactical basin plan templates that we use to develop our plans. And he'll also be talking a little bit about the Watershed Projects database, how we use project information. And then I will sort of take the helm back over and talk a little bit about the Clean Water Service Delivery Act that was passed in 2019, and then also talk about our tracking, accounting, and target setting work going forward. So watershed planning is not new to Vermont. Dating back to the mid-1970s, Vermont devoted significant resources to define the nature and extent of non-point source pollution problems, the geographic areas that need attention, and the programs needed to address them. In the 1970s, it was the Vermont's Department of Water Resources at the time that developed a series of basin plans that mostly addressed point source discharges and sector-based effects on water quality, which began to shift the focus a little more on non-point source pollution, as seen as then the emerging contributor to surface water degradation. Later, under Section 208 of the Federal Clean Water Act, which required states to develop water quality management plans, also known as area-wide plans, and such as the collaborative effort that was used to develop a basin plan for the South Lake back in 1989. In 2000, the Water Quality Division's Watershed Planning Initiative drafted guidelines for watershed planning, which served as the framework to inform the more recent version of our basin plans and basin planning process. So it's following on this approach. Other collaborative efforts were led also to the development of basin plans. These were largely sector specific, such as the 2008 Missisquoi Basin Area-Wide Watershed Plan that was led by the USDA NRCS folks with a specific focus on the agricultural sector. But during this time, we began to approve more recent, more modern versions of basin plans. So in 2010, the Water Quality Division became what's known now as the Watershed Management Division, and the newly integrated monitoring, assessment, and planning program at the time. We developed and published the Vermont Surface Water Management Strategy in 2010, which was updated just recently, fairly recently in 2017. It's due for another update, which we'll be coordinating our work on. In the Watershed Management Division issued the first generation of what's known as the tactical basin plans around 2012, which included these tactical basin plans for the Otter Creek, the Black and Ottauquechee rivers, the Memphremagog Basin, as well as the Winooski basin. And then the first round of modern plans for all 15 basins were completed in 2014, which culminated with the approval of the Deerfield and Passumpsic basin plans. And that represented the more current and focused, geographically targeted approach that we take now with our tactical basin plans. And we'll describe a little bit more about how they continue to evolve. So I should emphasize that tactical basin plans are implementation plans. Our tactical basin plans are identified as the implementation vehicle for the Lake Champlain TMDL and the Memphremagog TMDL, which was developed in 2017. The Champlain Basin plans and the Memph Basin plan contain that TMDL specific content. Tactical basin plans are also supported by the Clean Water Act Section 319 funding, which sets statewide and programmatic water quality priorities. Tactical basin plans on the major river basin scale has been and remains really an essential ingredient to Vermont's approach when managing non-point source pollution, and it reflects the surface water management strategy to describe what the state utilizes to address surface water stressors and pollutants. And as our tactical basin planning process describes how we go about doing that work, associated with both the strategy and the tactical basin planning process. There are two types of implementation really that we see associated with that. One being more the programmatic implementation efforts, such as which occurs under which took place under the passage of Act 64, promulgated new programs and regulatory requirements to meet TMDL goals, as well as our tactical on-the-ground implementation work vis-a-vis our tactical basin plans. So the fundamental principles of basin planning have not necessarily changed, and as were developed, per the guidelines for watershed planning back in 2000, developed by a framework committee. However, what's really changed is this tactical and targeted focus on waters based on their existing condition. Tactical basin plans address our legal requirements and clearly defined roles for partners and stakeholder groups, and use a report card format as a means to track implementation and measurable outcomes that should produce more tangible environmental benefits. And Ben will get a little bit more into the report card format. Tactical basin plans represents the state's adaptive management efforts to continually iterate on strategies to protect and restore surface waters, and whether or not we can answer questions like, did we protect the best waters? Are we achieving the highest uses? Are we improving waters that have been degraded? And did we lock in improvements? Just an overview here on some of the regulatory underpinnings of basin planning. Our tactical basin planning is carried out by the Water Investment Division now in collaboration with the Watershed Management Division and in coordination with other state agencies, statutory partners, and watershed stakeholders. Tactical basin plans are integral to meeting a broad array of both state and federal requirements, including the US EPA's 9-element framework for watershed plan development and state statutory obligations, and including those of the Vermont Clean Water Act, again, Act 64, and now the Clean Water Service Delivery Act of 2019, Act 76, and under state statute under 10 BSA 1253, which helps to outline the state's requirements for tactical basin planning and working with our statutory partners. The basin-specific water quality goals, objectives, strategies, and projects described in tactical basin plans aim to protect public health and safety and ensure public use and enjoyment of Vermont waters and their ecological health as set forward in the Vermont Surface Water Management Strategy and the Vermont Water Quality Standards, and is identified in total maximum daily load restoration plans. All right, basin planning by the numbers. Tactical basin planning process allows for the issuance of plans for Vermont's 15 major river basins every 5 years. as required by state statute. So we have 15 major river basins in the state. We have 5 basin planners. 3 basins are covered by each planner. We have 1 tactical basin plan prepared for each watershed on a 5-year cyclical process. And Ben will get a little bit more into describing sort of the process and just in a couple minutes. So when looking at integrated watershed assessment data, our tactical basin plans do integrate the surface water monitoring and assessment results to identify priorities for protection and restoration, which serves as the foundation of tactical basin plans. Our division works very closely with the Watershed Management Division to incorporate resource-specific data to inform comprehensive statewide integrated watershed assessments, which will aid in the prioritization of surface water protection and restoration activities. And by adapting EPA's framework for conducting integrated assessments of healthy watersheds, these assessments compile and synthesize monitoring data from our lakes, rivers, wetlands, and monitoring and assessment programs to evaluate the relative watershed condition. So what we do, the rotational watershed approach to monitoring and assessment that precedes and refreshes sort of our planning phase is depicted on the map on the left-hand side of the slide with columns that show the year that any particular basin is within the monitoring phase. And so there's focused monitoring work going on, or whether it's in the assessment phase column, meaning that we're looking to sort of compile and synthesize that data and develop these integrated watershed assessments. The purpose of the assessment process is to categorize Vermont surface waters as either being in full support, sometimes partial support, stressed, altered, or impaired per the designated uses of surface waters. Those 4 assessment categories and the factors and decision principles applied when evaluating that data determine if a water meets our water quality standards, and then the rationale when deciding where and how to list a particular water if it's not meeting water quality standards. The outcomes of the monitoring and assessment process is to produce the biennial report on the quality of the state's surface waters to EPA. Tactical basin plans also address the protection of existing and designated uses, which are at the heart of Vermont's water quality standards. The agency's Watershed Management Division biennially produces the state's water quality integrated assessment report and updates the known water quality conditions according to the Vermont Surface Water Assessment and Listing methodology. And what I'm showing here on this slide is an overview of the condition of aquatic life in the northern Lake Champlain Basin, and it shows sort of the different subbasins and drainages, and shows sort of how well we're either fully supporting those designated uses if they haven't been assessed, if there's an impairment, or if those waters are listed as stressed. And this is all relative to what we look at in terms of meeting designated uses, and that's the attainment of aquatic life support, such as supporting the bugs and fish, the critters that live in our surface waters, how well we protect aquatic habitat, how much we're providing those recreational uses that are vital to the enjoyment of surface waters, such as swimming, fishing, and boating, and then for things like water supply and irrigation. So it just provides sort of this snapshot of the health of the watershed that we can look at and just use to assess our progress in meeting water quality goals. And at this point, I want to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Ben Copans, who's going to segue into an overview of our tactical basin planning process, and then some of the templates that have been developed that help to further our tactical basin plan development work.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. So the tactical basin planning process takes these assessments and then compiles this in a way that supports the engagement with our partners and the public to develop our tactical basin plan. And so that process is really what I'm going to talk about. And so the tactical basin plans really serve as a strategic guidebook, which supports the collaboration between state agencies and partners in implementing high priority projects to protect and restore water quality in each basin. And so I just wanted to start off here with a couple of pictures of, one of the projects that was completed last year along Lake Memphremagog that was led by the Memphremagog Watershed Association, but it's typical of many of our projects around the state that really require the collaboration of the Memphremagog Watershed Association, the City of Newport, the engagement of our Lakes and Ponds program to provide technical support, and the support of the Northwood Stewardship Center. And so many of our projects out there on our landscape are really complex. And so it takes that coordinated approach, which our tactical basin plans support, to really keep these projects moving along. I also wanted to just flag that not all of our projects are on the ground requiring moving dirt or planting trees. We also support things like improving our town zoning bylaws or in developing farmer work groups that can increase the effectiveness of the work that we do in these areas. So I'm going to take just a second here to talk about some of our more recent changes in our tactical basin planning process, which mainly come down to the fact that in the last that we've developed in the last couple of years, which really comes down to the fact that we realized that we need to shorten up our planning process so that we're able to keep these plans updated every 5 years. And so it required us to look for ways to do the planning process in a more efficient way, but then also looking to increase our effectiveness as we're really updating tactical basin plans. We're not really starting from scratch. And so that shortened 18-month planning cycle is a change that we've worked on over the last couple of years. We also have some funding now that supports watershed groups, conservation districts, and regional planning commissions to assist in the planning process. Over the last several years, we've developed a tactical basin plan template to improve consistency and the efficiency of developing our tactical plans. We've included a report card on the accomplishments from our previous plan, using new tools such as surveys and story maps, integrating our best management tracking outputs into the plans to gauge progress in meeting our targets, and then also more effectively using our watershed projects database to catalog and track specific projects. So I'm first just going to go over the general 18-month planning cycle. So this planning cycle really starts off reaching out to the public with a kickoff meeting and a public survey, which is a new tool that we're starting to use. We really pull all the information in from our Watershed Management Division programs and start to develop an understanding of what those priorities are across the basin and update the report card from our previous tactical planning efforts. Over the next 5 months, we then shift from that information about what those water quality issues are to figuring out how we best address those. And that really requires us to reach out and gather information from partners across the watershed. And we use this process to begin to draft our implementation table, to develop a draft of the preliminary draft of the plan, which we then revise, engaging with many of our partners, release that plan for public comment, and then we finally put out the final plan at the end of this 18-month timeline. So the goal of this planning process is to develop our tactical basin plan. And I wanted to just spend a little bit of time going over the template that we're using for our tactical basin plans. So over the last 2 years, our planning team has worked to really standardize how we structure our tactical basin plans so that we follow the same outline. And we also use many of the same graphics, which we're fortunate to have Sean Regalado with our Watershed Management Division program, who provides many of these graphics for us. And so our tactical basin plan starts out with a basic basin overview that really provides a higher level understanding of basin, what some of the major stressors are, what some of the high quality waters and some unique features of our basins. We then take all of that monitoring and assessment data and identify waters that are priorities for protection, waters that are priority for restoration. And then we take those restoration and protection priorities, and that really guides the work that we need to do in our basins. And then we organize our basins by source sector. So we identify things by across the agricultural landscape. So what those priorities are across our agricultural landscape, our developed lands, and our natural resource sectors to meet and address those restoration and protection priorities, which then feeds into our implementation table, which really is the strategic guidebook to support our water quality efforts. So another recent change in our planning process is that we have funding now to support watershed groups, conservation districts, and regional planning commissions to support our tactical basin planning efforts. And this has really made a huge difference because it allows us as basin planners to reach a much broader audience through each of these organizations who can then reach out to their constituents and then also help us to compile all of the information we need to develop targeted strategies to address our water quality issues. But I also want to note that while we have funding for these 3 statutory partners to be involved in the tactical basin planning process, we also closely coordinate with, generally around 20 partners in each of our basins. So across our state agencies, the Agency of Agriculture, our Forest Parks and Rec, our Department of Fish and Wildlife, our Agency of Transportation, but we also engage our federal partners, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service, as well as multiple statewide environmental organizations or other partners that are engaged in a given basin. So the planning process is really meant to be a collaborative effort. So we kick off the planning process with our initial community outreach. So we often have a kickoff meeting where we engage partners in a basin. But we've also been using story maps as another tool that we can reach a broader audience. So we compile all of our assessment information in those maps around our water quality conditions, and we provide that information out to the public in the story map format, which can be a much more digestible way for the public to understand some of these issues. And for the many people that aren't able to attend a public meeting, they can get online and get some of this information. And another tool that I'm really excited about is the use of watershed surveys. And so Danielle Orzowski, our planner that covers the Lamoille watershed, put together a survey and has sent this out really broadly across the Lamoille River watershed and received well over 100 responses. And the survey is still out there if anyone hasn't filled it out yet. But it really gives us a way to reach a broader community and understand some community water quality concerns, to understand what the community understands in terms of water quality issues, so where there might be some information gaps, and also understand what barriers might be to implementing some of our clean water projects. So another important step as we're kicking off the planning process is to develop our tactical basin planning report cards. And so this is where we take our previous tactical basin plan implementation table and we essentially go strategy by strategy and identify if we've accomplished the strategy, if it's been completed, if it's started and hasn't been completed, so it's in progress, or if we haven't started the project and it's still a priority, and so it's awaiting action, or if we haven't started it and it's no longer relevant, where we flag it as discontinued. And I think one of the thing that I'm really excited about is when we do this across our tactical basin plans, generally over 75% of the strategies that we flag in our tactical basin plans have been completed or in progress. And it's really valuable as we're updating these tactical basin plans to take some time and see what we have accomplished from our last tactical basin plan, what some barriers might be, and that really informs the strategies that we need to develop for our next tactical basin plan. And so this example here, one of those strategies was to support reclassification of the Dennis Pond wetlands. And so that was one of those that we accomplished over the last 5 years. So the next chapter in our tactical basin plan really gets into those protection priorities. And I'm really not going to get into this in too much detail. We could probably spend a whole meeting on this topic. But just want to flag that tactical basin plans include an assessment of water quality data to identify waters that meet criteria for different water quality classifications. And we do that across several uses of water. So public water supply, fishing use, aquatic biota or habitat, and aesthetics, particularly for lakes. And then we also can flag potential class 1 wetlands, as well as outstanding resource waters, or areas where we would like to get out and do some monitoring to determine if waters might meet these higher criteria. But a big focus of our plan is not just on those waters that are in great condition, but on restoring waters that aren't. So this is our restoration priorities. And a lot of this comes from the work that our Watershed Management Division does. And as Ethan talked about, the assessments of whether waters are stressed or impaired. And so those are priorities for us. But we also look at our inland lake scorecard, where we have some increasing nutrient trends or poor or fair shoreline conditions to identify what waters in a given basin should be a priority for restoration work. But in addition to which waters are impaired or stressed, we also have our total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, that really get into more specifics around what needs to happen to restore our waters across certain areas. And so, two of our larger TMDLs are the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog phosphorus TMDLs. And, each of those TMDLs requires major work across a large number of these sectors to achieve our water quality goals. And so the TMDLs get into some more specifics around what those load reduction targets are across each of these land uses. And so these graphics here are from the recently adopted North Lake Basin Plan, and present some of that information specific to the Lake Champlain TMDL. I think some of the new work that we're doing is now that we're able to track our phosphorus load reductions across several of our sectors, we can put these phosphorus reduction targets from our TMDL into some context with how far we've actually, how much we've been able to achieve through our implementation work. And so this bar chart here shows in blue what the TMDL reduction targets are, and the green bars are what we've already achieved based on our tracking and accounting. And you can see in some of these sub-watersheds like Jewett Brook, we've achieved a high percentage of that phosphorus reduction target from our TMDL, while other basins, in this example, the La Platte River, we've not done as well. And so it really allows us to target where we need to do some additional work and try to understand why we might not be seeing those phosphorus reductions from the La Platte River watershed, and then develop strategies to follow through on those. So when it comes to that restoration and protection work, we organize our tactical basin plans by the sectors which align with our Clean Water Reporting Framework and with our Clean Water Initiative program. And so these are agriculture, developed lands stormwater, developed lands roads, wastewater, and then natural resources, which we further break down into our lakes, ponds, wetlands, and forested lands. And so this is really useful to have these same categories because it allows us to track our accomplishments by these same sectors as our tactical basin plans are broken out into. So it allows us to put these implementation efforts in the context of how many best management practices we've accomplished statewide, or in the case of our Lake Memphremagog and Lake Champlain basins, it allows us to account for phosphorus load reductions across these same sectors. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here just to run through an example of how we focus on one of these sectors, so in this case, agriculture, to develop strategies that are really the key point to our tactical basin plans. And you don't need to try to read all the points on the slide. I'm gonna cover these things in some follow-up slides, but at a higher level, each of these sectors has a set of data that we collect and compile. And then we have different sets of partners that we work across each of these sectors. And so in the agricultural landscape, we have a large number of partners working with farmers to reduce water quality impacts. And so it's required us to have a little bit more of a structured process. So we have a structured way that we engage our partners through some agricultural partner meetings. And then we have the review of the draft plan. And then I also really want to emphasize the fact that we follow up with implementation. So in terms of the data that we draw on, one of the new tools that we have that we really use to display some of our data is the Power BI that can be really powerful in looking at the data that we have across several of these areas. And so we have our modeler, Philip Jones, that puts all this information together, and he compiles things like land use, our phosphorus reductions that we've achieved based on our best management practices, our acreages of those practices that have been implemented, as well as our phosphorus load reduction targets from the TMDL. And it allows you to go online and click through and look at specific subwatersheds and also specific practices. And so it really allows people to drill down into the data. And again, in that example of the La Platte River, it might give us a sense of what's going on in the La Platte River in terms of best management practices, or what is going on in our Jewett Brook watershed and how we've been able to achieve those significant phosphorus reductions. So we compile all this information. We also get some additional information from our Agency of Agriculture, and we put this together in a bunch of maps and these online tools that we can share with our agricultural partners and really help us to guide our discussion. And so we take that information. We often do a little bit of pre-work with our Agency of Ag or our other partners to develop some preliminary understandings of what's going on in a specific basin. And then we work with our natural resource conservation districts frequently to pull together an agricultural partner meeting with many of the active partners across our basins. And we do this work, we start off with a discussion of some of the data, what we've been able to accomplish, what our current agricultural implementation efforts are. And then we really spend some time to identify what are those gaps? Where are we not meeting our water quality targets? What more could we do? And we work with our agricultural partners to develop strategies to fill in those gaps, because those partners are the people that are on the ground and really know what additional support they need to meet our water quality targets. And so we take all that information, we use it to develop our tactical basin plan section for agriculture. And then we go through our internal and our public comment period where we get feedback from the public and we respond to that comment in the responsiveness summary, and we produce our final plan. And one of the points I wanted to highlight here is one of the new tools that we've been using as part of this public process is our story maps. And so we can use these story maps to really guide our presentations online, but then any point in time, people can go into these story maps and interact with some of the mapping tools and other tools online. And I think it makes it a much more digestible, it's a much more digestible way to get some of this information. And then once our plan is approved, it really gets into the implementation phase. And this is really important that we follow up our plans with a continued effort to implement them. And so in the case of the Memphremagog watershed, for example, I know the Orleans County Conservation District used our tactical basin plan as a foundational document to help guide their strategic plan. And many of our partners use tactical basin plans to help guide the work they're doing on the ground to maximize the impact of the work that we're doing. In case of many of our basins, we meet annually to track progress. And again, these coordinated efforts just allow for more effective implementation work. And especially now that we have our Clean Water Initiative annual performance report, we have an annual check on how effective we're being in terms of achieving some of those load reduction targets or increasing our best management practice implementation. So that's an example across our agricultural lands, but we go through a similar process across many other of our sectors. And so we really draw upon our sector-based assessments as one of the foundational tools to help guide where this work needs to happen. So things like stream geomorphic assessments, town zoning and corridor protection, lake watershed action plans, stormwater master planning, or road erosion inventories really guide our priorities across those different land use sectors. So another point I wanted to make is just that our strategies and our implementation table and our tactical basin plans generally don't get down to the individual project level. So we're generally talking about groups or categories of projects, but then we catalog all of our specific projects within our watershed projects database. And there's often a relationship between those strategies in our implementation table, which might represent 10 or 15 individual projects, which are cataloged in our watershed projects database. And what we're doing now is we're now connecting our strategy table with these with these projects so that we can keep track of how well we're doing in terms of achieving or implementing these projects. And so, I just really want to encourage people, if they haven't had a chance to get online and look at our Clean Water portal and look at our Watershed Project Explorer or our Watershed Projects database search, that these are really amazing tools that allow you to get online and see all those individual projects. You can sort by town or basin or project type and really see what projects have been completed, what projects have been developed or designed, and what projects are in progress. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ethan to talk a little bit about where we're going.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. That was a great overview of the process and the templates that we're using. Thank you. So now I'm going to do the cosmic zoom, and I'm going to take us from the present into the future and into the new frontier as we take tactical basin planning through the space-time continuum. No, but seriously. So looking at sort of how we move forward, for these next few slides, I will be discussing the Clean Water Service Delivery Act of 2019, our related target setting to meet our water quality restoration goals associated with TMDL implementation, and what's known as the Phase 3 content of our tactical basin plans, where tactical basin plans will continue to be an iterative process or iterative phases of the implementation work for the Champlain, Memphremagog, and for other TMDLs. Since these concepts are very much interrelated, I will try to show how these are connected as we move forward into the next phase of tactical basin plans. And what's shown here on the left of the slide is it's a conceptual cycle of how the state will establish TMDL targets in order to track and assess our progress in meeting water quality goals. And I'll get in a little bit further into that as we get into the discussion of Act 76. The Act, the Clean Water Service Delivery Act of 2019 does four very important things. Firstly, from a perspective of clean water work that is vital to Vermont, the Act establishes a long-term funding source for the state's Clean Water Fund. Second, the Act also prioritizes clean water funding for non-regulatory programs and projects. So in order to meet our goals under the Lake Champlain Phosphorus Restoration Plan, aka the TMDL, or the Lake Memphremagog Phosphorus TMDL, which is also a restoration plan, or any phosphorus or pollution control plan subsequent to the Act, there are required and non-required activities. Required activities are, for example, complying with the municipal roads general permit. There's also the 3-acre stormwater permit, and compliance with required agricultural practices or the acceptable management practices for forestry, for silviculture. There's also a whole host of non-required activities that nonetheless are needed in order to achieve the goals of the TMDL. So natural resource restoration projects include river and floodplain restoration, wetland restoration, conservation easements, buffer plantings, etc. These projects aren't necessarily required, but have a high degree of pollution reduction value. You know, for instance, for nutrient and sediment reduction. There's other non-regulatory projects that are likely to be included in this category, such as sub-jurisdictional stormwater treatments. And so the Act recognizes this and requires that the state invest in the Clean Water Fund, firstly into those non-regulatory projects, and then secondarily into those required projects, regulatory projects, if you will, if funding remains. Third, the Act establishes a network of decentralized clean water service providers that are located within the major planning basins of the state of Vermont. And a little bit more on that in the next slide. The Act provides the department with rulemaking authority to establish the rules of the road for how these service providers operate, the assignment of clean water service providers to each of the major river basins, and who these service providers will be. And currently there is a draft rule that's currently progressing through the rulemaking process. And then lastly, the Act also establishes 4 new grant programs that replace the current ecosystem restoration program and other grant programs which are administered by the agency. So the Act establishes these decentralized networks, and they're actually comprised of 2 companion entities that work together. The first is the clean water service provider itself, and the service provider's role is to establish essentially what is a board of directors for each basin, which are these basin water quality councils, and then in coordination with the council to identify, develop, construct, verify, and then operate and maintain clean water projects, and in particular with a focus on these non-regulatory clean water projects. In doing so, the projects that get developed are those that are congruent with the applicable tactical basin plan and in consideration of pollution reduction values associated with the project, such as the phosphorus benefit, but also co-benefits provided by the project, as well as the cost of project design and implementation, and the operation and maintenance associated with the project. So basin water quality councils are established by the clean water service providers. They're created to provide localized water quality knowledge and to establish policy and help make decisions for the service providers regarding the most significant water quality issues within each basin and how to address them. In essence, the basin water quality councils will be assisting the service provider to prioritize which projects have the greatest value in achieving our clean water goals, objectives, and those related targets for pollution reduction. A suite of projects may be considered for each basin water quality council in order to achieve the phosphorus reduction targets that are assigned by the state, but also to meet local benefits and to be implemented in the most efficient manner possible. And then very importantly, and as part of this process, because the tactical basin planning is sort of fundamental to all this work, the council members will have ongoing support to participate in the tactical basin planning process. As Ben described, our tactical basin planning grants will continue to provide the support and some of the framework and how Basin Water Quality Council members and our statutory partners will actively participate in the basin planning process and in this work going forward. So when we look at the future, when we look at target setting associated with our tactical basin plans in order to meet TMDL goals, and when we look at the development of strategies to populate those tactical basin planning implementation tables, we need to consider how to make these strategies smart. So they need to be specific. We need to make them geographically targeted and sector specific. They need to be measurable so we can see what the quantifiable reductions might be if there's qualitative indicators and outcomes. They need to be achievable. We need to have those resources, the technical assistance and funding to help do the implementation work. They should be relevant. They should be appropriate work plans to achieve the targets that are set, and they should be timely. We know that we are breaking out sort of the TMDL implementation work over in 5-year increments over a 20-year TMDL lifespan. So just as an example of a smart strategy to achieve a target, it may be that towns in the South Lake Champlain watershed will upgrade 15% of their roads under the municipal roads general permit by 2026, just as an example. And then to talk a little bit more about sort of TMDL progress tracking and accounting, the Clean Water Initiative Program currently tracks BMP implementation with numerous state and federal agencies to develop and implement tracking and accounting methodologies for clean water projects. And I'm providing a pointer here to their website, which provides an overview of the accounting methodologies and some of the standard operating procedures and how they apply those accounting methodologies to determine what the estimated phosphorus or pollution removal might be. And as Ben already highlighted, the Clean Water Program puts together that annual investment report, which helps to show the progress by each basin. So there's reporting at the program level to do that BMP accounting by sector, by project type. There's tracking work that's going on to look at the sort of quantitative value associated with BMP implementation. What is the project? Where was it implemented? How much is the pollution reduction value? How long does the project expected to last for? And then we do accounting work. There's regulatory programmatic implementation that's going on in compliance with different required practices or acceptable practices. So we have to quantify the load reductions expected with those management measures, that regulatory program implementation on the planning basin scale and then on an iterative cycle. And then we determine, so we're looking at that by sector, by basin, even by some basin. We then need to determine the portion of the target per sector that can be achieved through non-regulatory activities. So we're doing a gap analysis there to look at what we can achieve, firstly by regulatory program implementation, and then secondly through our non-regulatory project implementation work. We then need to assess that progress and then reset those targets every 5 years. So this TMDL accounting and target setting work is being incorporated into our tactical basin plans going forward, what's known as the Phase 3 content. And I'm showing another expression here, sort of to wrap things up, of our Power BI work that our modeler, Philip Jones, has been doing, just to kind of show you sort of an overview of sort of what this looks like. So we have to establish both the interim and the 5-year target load reductions for all waste load and loaded allocation sectors. We identify these in our basin plans. We first have to assign the baseline loading rates for each sector, for each of the Lake Champlain Basin lake segments, which are modeled loading rates per the SWAT model. And then we need to translate those targets per sector from the lake segment boundary to our tactical basin planning watershed boundary. And then next slide, what's shown here is the total target reductions needed to achieve the TMDL over a 20-year time frame. And this is a matter of how the tactical basin, it might be how some of the those targets do get assigned, and then which get assigned to our service providers going forward. So just kind of a brief overview of that. Just want to show you that this is work in progress. And just so that's a lot to kind of throw at you folks. But just to wrap things up here, just wanted to show some of the contacts for our watershed planning program. On the left hand of the slide, you'll see a map of the state that's color coded and also symbolized. And each of our 5 planners, or I should say, Ben Copans is the supervising planner, and then 4 basin planners there, where they are sort of distributed around the state, which includes Karen Bates, Marie Kududo, Danielle Ozarski, and Angie Allen. And I will put a pause on things there. And if we do have any questions, try to allow a couple minutes for any questions that did come in.
Thank you so much, Ben and Ethan. That was an incredible presentation. I personally thought and beyond slides were perfect. So we do have a couple questions in the chat. How many tactical basin plans address significant impairments indicated by the presence of cancerous fish, for example, those found in South Bay in Lake Memphremagog?
How many basin plans address, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how many tactical basin plans address significant impairments indicated by diseased fish in Lake Memphremagog? That's quite the word.
Well, that's a question specific to the Memphremagog basin, and I'll let Ben address that. I'll just say though that we work closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who do the fisheries assessment work for us. Our basin plans, while we do address fish habitat and looking to improve water quality to improve aquatic habitat, our basin plans aren't necessarily fisheries management plans. It's a good question though. If Ben has anything to add, I will certainly let him jump in.
Yeah, I would just say that that very specific topic is something that we're talking about. When we did our last tactical basin plan for the Memphremagog watershed, that issue wasn't front and center. And so we're talking about that right now in terms of how that issue might be tackled in this next iteration of our tactical basin plan. I'd say, one of the challenges with our basin plans with an issue like that is we don't know what's causing those issues. And so essentially we identify that there's a need to understand more information about that, but we don't yet have a source for which tactical basin plan is really designed to try to get at those sources. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have another question. What is the most efficient way to share BMPs on a real-time basis? Not just what happened, but why they worked. And thanks.
Oh, that's another great question. I think we continue to have sector-specific work groups that meet regularly to discuss BMP implementation efforts and look at the efficacy of BMP implementation, certain BMP types. We certainly have, the accounting methodologies that there's a great deal of literature review that's gone into informing the development of accounting methodologies, and for which the Clean Water Initiative program has been endeavoring to, to apply those accounting methodologies to look at BMP efficiency. I would also just say that, we look a lot to what other states are doing, and in particular, looking at the Chesapeake Bay states and the work that they are doing also, because they've been sort of at this a little bit longer than we have in doing TMDL implementation work. And so being able to really do the accounting work around BMP implementation and the subsequent sort of improvements, just the progress that's being made towards meeting TMDL goals, I think that's been really important.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Thank you for this impressive body of work. Regarding the step of basin planning that involves assessment of water quality data that meets criteria, what contaminants are currently included? By what process do you consider adding new contaminants for which we do not currently have criteria or comprehensive data, but which may affect designated uses like aquatic biota and the quality of public drinking water?
Yeah, so there is a sort of a triennial review process of our water quality standards to take stock of the criteria that is being used to assess surface waters and aquatic habitat, aquatic biota, and we continue to sort of look at that criteria and update that. We continue to get guidelines on sort of emerging, guidelines from EPA on emerging contaminants and where we want to incorporate that criteria into our water quality standards. I think there was a look at incorporating criteria around aluminum, for instance. So that is sort of ongoing work that's managed through our watershed management division and doing that triennial review of our water quality standards. But know very much that we have a lot of efforts looking at these contaminants of emerging concern and what they represent in our aquatic environment.
Awesome, thank you. That is all the questions for today. Thank you, Ben and Ethan. That was wonderful. I learned a lot, even though I'm in the same group as you guys. And yeah, I'm going to post in the chat an attendee survey. So if everybody who's attended would like to fill that out, we really appreciate any and all feedback.
Great, and thank you all so very much for attending. Thank you, Rachel, for your assistance. Thanks, Ben. Thanks everyone. Thanks for filling out the survey, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.